it was like the screenshot that we upload up to YouTube sometimes of our replays. I'm never, even if Debbie reminds me to smile, I'm
never smiling.
Well, yeah, it's always like mid movement.
Hello, we have a bunch of folks on. Holly and Nathaniel, Laura, Jen. Jen's always on. I love that. If everybody can hear us, we would love for you to say hello in the chat. Good evening to everybody that's here. So I have to say that Jen, hi. Jen's gonna blush even though we can't see her face because she's my biggest fan, aren't you, Jen? And she's on all of our webinars, which I love. I always feel so comfortable and confident knowing you're out there, Jen, rooting me on, right?
I think you got a couple. Jen, you might have some competition. I mean, I'm sure you're not alone.
Yeah, so we really appreciate that. And welcome to everybody else. We're still a few minutes early, so we're glad that you are all here.
Debbie, I gotta say, it looks a little weird with your board cleared behind you.
I know. I was going to tell that to Angie. So those of you who have seen me from home before, if you're new here, yeah, we used to have all kinds of nice things on the board, but we're actually moving.
All your race medals,
everything's empty. Yeah, so people would know that I'm a runner, I guess. But yeah, no, I had to pack all of those up. I couldn't throw them away, but I did throw many things away. So yes, so in between the webinars and running Study Pro.
Why not just throw a big move in there? Why not?
Yes, it's a good thing that I have some great executive function skills. Strategies, right?
Chunking it down and planning it since, well, March.
Yes. So all of you out there who have moved in the last, whatever, 10 years, you probably still feel the pain of what that feels like. So we still have folks joining, and we're going to wait till about 7 o'clock to start. And we know that there's some parents here because there's somebody actually signed in as parent. Welcome, parent, and welcome, Lynn and Cheryl and Julie. We're so glad that you guys are here. Sometimes I find that when I sign up for the 9 a.m. webinars, it's a little bit easier because I'm like starting my day, and by the end of the day, sometimes it's harder for me to get on. So I'm always happy to see people.
Angela, is your background London? Is that
it is? Yeah.
I like it. I like the black and white.
Thanks.
So everybody had to have their little Zoom environment, right?
This is actually my husband's, but his area. But
you share.
Yes,
I think that was another thing we all had to share or learn to share.
Yes, that was really helpful.
Because I don't play the guitar, so it's kind of misleading there on the back.
Hi, Leslie. So good to see you. Kinds of friendly faces, people that we know before, which is nice. So, so we are at the top of the hour. So Angie, I'll kind of let you kick it off.
Okay, great. Thank you. So welcome to Nysmith's last parent education series event, PTO event of the school year. It's hard to believe that the school year's over almost, but we will start them up, of course, next year when the year starts again. So I wanted to also let you know that this is being recorded and it will be sent out through the look ahead and also hopefully compiled all of the programs that we've had this year and sent out to parents. So tonight I wanted to introduce Debbie Rosen and Lindsay Toms, who are the owners of the Study Pro, which is an executive function and study skills center located really close to us in McLean. So the Study Pro works with students to help them better manage and process the process of school. So this means helping students become better planners, time managers, initiators, organizers, and completers of work. Most students aren't taught these skills, yet they are so deeply needed to be successful at school and throughout their careers. So more information about this, the Study Pro can be found online at www.thestudypro.com. So we are really looking forward to your discussion. And just know that during the talk, you're able to ask questions in the chat function. And then also at the end of the discussion, they will stick around for a little while to answer any additional questions. So thank you for coming tonight, and I'll turn it over to Debbie and Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angie. And thanks so much to Nysmith for having us. I'm Debbie Rosen. And as Angie mentioned, Lindsay and I are going to share our thoughts with you on how we think you can be your child's executive function cheerleader, and really what all that means, and how by understanding executive function, that will help you to become more solutions oriented when we're collaborating with our kids about how to solve homework problems and overall kind of managing school, as Angie mentioned. So I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about why we're here and what we're hoping to accomplish. A lot of talk, especially over the last several years, has been, I guess, a lot of notoriety, I guess, has come around executive functions. This is kind of a term that we use, and I think a lot of people throw it around, but not necessarily understand exactly what executive functions are. And there are a lot of different definitions of executive function, but we'll share with you the definition that we use, and really how you can understand when you're looking at a specific executive function or a set of executive functions, what are kind of some of the common challenges that you see. So oftentimes you might think that a student might be, underperforming or, not as motivated, but really, by understanding what those specific executive functions are that are really the root cause, it helps us as parents to be really able to provide solutions instead of really just frustrations, like they're not motivated. And we, as I said, we want to be very solutions oriented. And one of the things we'll emphasize throughout the evening is one of the philosophies that we share, and we tell anyone who will listen all of the time, is that what we hope for students is that they realize that by working with you as parents, or by working with us when they work with us, that every time there's a barrier that they see, whether it's having trouble getting started, or pushing through work, or figuring out what they have to do, or rushing through work, that there's a strategy. And so we really want to start talking about how can we communicate and start using a vocabulary that is, again, very solutions oriented, very, very positive, and really helping the kids to solve the problem that they're having, versus kind of just assuming that they know how to do certain things. So we're going to talk a little bit about what executive functions are, and I'm going to do, I guess, the first introduction part, which is to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then Lindsay's going to go a little bit more into kind of the technical aspect of what the executive functions are. So as you're reading this slide, obviously some of the things that we see when we're looking at underdeveloped executive functions are that we may procrastinate, we might have a hard time with mental flexibility or switching from one thing to another. I might have some challenges with emotional control. So if I find something that might be difficult for me, I might just give up or push my computer aside. And one that I know in talking to parents all the time that we see is that we wait until the last minute to start things that might have longer term deadlines. Some other things that we might see is that I might forget to turn things in on time, or forget to turn them in at all. So oftentimes we hear from parents and students, I do my work and then I just forget to turn it in, which I'm sure is very frustrating to all of us, including the student. And one of the other terms that you'll hear tonight is self-monitoring. So I can make the same mistakes multiple times because maybe I'm just, maybe I'm not really completely registering that I'm making that, or I don't have the ability, the skills to kind of know that even though I made the mistake, even though I want to not make it again, I don't really have the skills to avoid that. Another thing that we see, which often isn't as well understood in terms of executive functions, is that there may be some what you can think of as like perfectionism. So I sometimes take way too long to do things because I just really am scared to get them wrong. I was working with a student the other night, and she just, no, 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 I can't start. I can't start because I think she was so nervous about the fact that she might write something that just wasn't perfect. And then the other piece too, which is, I know, very frustrating sometimes to parents, and there's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to an understanding that we parents have, is when I make excuses. So sometimes, I hate to use the word, but parents will think, oh, my student isn't honest with me, or they lied to me. But I think hopefully what can explain to you tonight, really, that it's not really a lie, that it's that again, it's underdeveloped skills. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Lindsay to expand a little bit more on what those executive functions are more technically.
I mean, I'm smiling because I love talking about this, but even just hearing what Debbie was just saying, everything from the turning the assignments into the last moment to making the same mistakes to the perfectionism and even that last one of making excuses, all of those are performed by these processes that you see here on the screen. So these are the breakdown of the executive functions. You don't need to know all of them. You don't have to have them memorized, but the only important thing you need to know is that these are the set of processes in your brain that allow you to get stuff done, all of us. So your student, your child, no matter if they're 5 or 15, 25, they are working on developing these skills. And the other takeaway that's really important to know is they are learning to develop these skills. So if you've ever said to your student or said to yourself, you know what to do. I know they know what to do, but they're just not doing it. It's really a result of these. The good news is they can be supported. One way that we can support them and that we are asked to be or use them very often is through the study skills and the strategies that they can use when they're applying to their schoolwork at school. So I'm just going to show those real quick to you briefly here. Everything that you see here on your screen are what is asked of our students to do every single day to be successful in school. They're asked to manage their time. They're asked to take tests, show their knowledge. They're asked to advocate, say what they need, communicate with their teachers, to their peers, to their parents. All of these skills here require those executive function skills to be successful. So why we talk about these in tandem is because sometimes we're like, they just need to study more. Well, they might need to know how to study. They might need to know when to study. And then when it comes time to study, that when, do I have the initiation skill? Do I have that executive function skill to initiate? I know I have that test tomorrow. Do I know how to study? And then backwards, now that I know how to study, now do I know how to get started when I actually need to? So that's why we talk about these in tandem, is because the good news again is that they can be developed and they can be supported through these strategies here. So let's take a goal. If you think about executive functions and your study skills as the tools that you need to achieve a goal. We are almost in summer. If I can get countdowns in the chat, I would love it. It will give me some dopamine, give me some energy. How many days are you left with, maybe at Nysmith, any other schools? I think Langley, Debbie, is it 11 or 10? Is it 10? Oh, 10. Oh my gosh. So the countdown is on. 9 days. Okay. So we are so very, very close to the end of school. And then sometimes the belief is that at the end of school, the goals disappear, right? The goals disappear because we're so relieved to be at the end of the school year. Well, I want to think about a goal that, we want to complete a summer reading. The school might have assigned, hey, here's some goals for the summer, and you got to complete the summer reading. And they're even going to give you some choice. They're going to say, hey, here's a list of books that we recommend for 6th graders to read over the summer. Pick what you like, and then you're going to write a book report back in the fall. Now, the fall is a long time away. Keep this in mind. The adolescent brain can really only see at max 2 weeks into the future. The adult brain can see about 6 months. So the adolescent brain is thinking 2 weeks. Are we thinking about the fall book report at all? No, not at all. So I'm not kind of at the 2-week level after COVID. I can only plan 2 weeks ahead, but that goal of completing the summer reading actually has all these little micro goals that we still need to use strategies for. So do I know where the list is? Can I choose it? Will I have a little bit of that perfectionism of, am I making the right choice when I'm choosing my book? You can see how this whole little chain of events, of goals, kicks off with this one larger goal of completing summer reading. So when there's that frustrating point, when it's usually late July, early August, the back to school ads start happening, and us as parents might say, oh yeah, where's that goal of the summer reading? I haven't seen them crack that book open yet. Then we have a little bit of panic. So when that happens, we can come and we can get shifted into our own fight or flight or anxiety mode. So we just wanted to stop and remind, on the next slide we're going to go through, we can understand why that can be incredibly frustrating. But we're telling you all of this because coming from that fight or flight brain doesn't actually help us solve and help them with the solutions to get these goals met.
Yeah, and I'll actually pick up from here. I know we're going to the next slide, but one of the things that we talk a lot about, and it's a little bit of foreshadowing for later, is we often ask our kids, have you started your homework? So, if you think about that as an example here, starting homework is in the green box. We don't always think about, we just think, oh, starting homework is something they know how to do. And I hope one of the things that you take away is like an aha moment that I did when I first saw, when Lindsay first put this together many years ago when we were talking about it, was, oh my gosh, it's right. There's so many executive functions that I need. I need to be able to self-monitor enough to know, like I knew that I know where to go and find something. And then I have to be able to concentrate on it, look at it, make these decisions. And it's the same type of thing when it's starting our homework. So we're going to talk a little bit, as we move on what we want to do about this. And so, what we say, what we said earlier, and we said is true, is really that it's really by only identifying that underlying cause, that underdeveloped skill, executive function skill, that we can provide the right approach. And so we're going to spend, of course, the second half of this whole presentation talking about how we can develop those skills. But it is very tempting for us as parents to sometimes think, and we hear this a lot, in calls, that our kids just aren't as motivated, or they should just be able to chunk their work. And a lot of the things that we've put here are things we've heard from parents, and that doesn't mean that they're bad or there's anything wrong. It's just that it's not helpful to provide a solution. But what we really want is to change. And I think the other thing that I'll really mention is that sometimes, these kids, they really want to do well. Every student, every child wants their parents to feel so proud of them, more than anything, more than anyone. And they themselves, school is their job. And I often ask parents, if you had a job and you weren't doing particularly well, you were being graded and you were getting a C in something, or you were getting a B in some of part of your job, but your boss was really hard on you, how would you be feeling about yourself? There's no doubt in my mind that you would want to be incredibly successful, and so would they. And so what we really want to do is help them to see that, somebody mentioned this in the text earlier about this kind of concept of the growth mindset. But related to that is that when I have a strategy, whether it's any part of that goal chart that you just saw, when I have a barrier, any part of that goal chart you just saw, there's always going to be a strategy I can use if I can't get through it. So it's going to be okay to say, I'm not great at, going into my portal and remembering everything all the time. Maybe I'm just not there yet. Maybe I'm not someone who can every single time look in the portal and see exactly what I have to do, or every single time finish all the questions. Again, we have a homework center, and we work with students all the time, and we ask them to go through everyone, we go through with them planning every one of their assignments. And oftentimes students will say, oh, I don't have any math. And we'll say, that's okay. Let's just pop it open and take a look. Oh, yeah. And you see that. Were they lying to me that they didn't have any math? No, absolutely not. It's just that maybe they were really thinking about that history assignment, or maybe they were just forgetting that they didn't have that. So the truth is that we say, great, that's okay. No problem. That's why we use the strategy of planning. That's why we always check everything in our portal. That's why you always go through, if you use Schoology and SIS as an example, or Student View, we always go through both what you have and what might be missing work. So the whole goal is that we really want parents and caregivers to work with their students side by side on things that are strategy oriented and versus problem seeking, meaning like, problem seeking, not that we're seeking the problem, but just identifying the problems. So what we always talk about is that the difference in terms of the advice that we give to parents in terms of how they help is really on the process side versus content. And I just want to spend 1 minute talking about that. So the content in school is the math, science, history, all of that. And, if you think about the classic tutoring, they would, of course, help with content. So you are really struggling with, you have a student struggling with math, then you would obviously potentially get a math tutor. But what we do and what executive functions, support is, regardless if it's coming from you as a parent or from us, is really helping with the process of school. And two things I'll say about that. One is that the process side of school and the executive function skills are really, they're just not the same as intelligence. You can have the most intelligent, child who can still struggle with executive function skills. That is not a reflection on their intelligence. Around here, I say often to parents, we have a lot of very, very smart kids. But what happens is we also have very aggressive curriculums. We have curriculums that can ask more of their executive functions than they're actually able to give. And if you think about someone like a 5-year-old student, a 5-year-old kid who might be in kindergarten, you wouldn't say to your child who's 5 years old, hey, why don't you go upstairs and get these 3 things and meet me down here in 10 minutes. And why is that? Because those executive functions, that's a goal, right? As Lindsay had talked about with executive functions. And, they have to plan, they have to kind of manage that. They have to organize their thoughts. They have to, have working memory to remember all of those multi-step directions. So all of those things are really the process of doing it. It doesn't mean they're not smart because they can't do that. No, that part of their brain has yet to fully develop, and they're not capable yet of doing that. So sometimes what's happening is that, as kids' executive functions develop, all the way through their late 20s, even early 30s, a lot of that will start coming online. And in the meantime, what we want to do is to help them with strategies. And we want to replace that underdeveloped skill with a strategy that will compensate essentially for that. And that's really what we're going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay.
So one of the most important areas that parents can help support with in the process part of school is this time management. And what you see here is a real tool that we call work windows, is a way to visualize time. So keep this in mind that as that frontal lobe is developing, as these skills are developing, it is very hard to picture time, even if they've been telling time for a while now. 3 o'clock doesn't necessarily mean anything, but being able to visualize, but from 3 to 4, I am unavailable, and we gray it out. This is a way for them to actually, it's an initiation tool. It can help them because once I've grayed out all these times and appointments that are unmovable, that I'm at school, I'm asleep, I have this doctor's appointment, anything that we have there, now we have this ability to now look for these white open spaces on my schedule for the week. And I can't really lie to myself. This is one of the greatest strategies to use, and I still to this day will use it for myself, that I can't lie to myself and tell myself I'll do it later if I know I literally don't have any of those white open times on Thursday. It helps initiate. It helps it make it real and concrete. Now, we show you this. This might be a typical weekly calendar filled with appointments. We have a lot of scheduling needs in this area. So we have a lot of appointments, we have a lot of sports, we have a lot of activities. So the time that we have might shrink, but then in about 2 weeks, as most of us were saying, in about 11 days here, this calendar might shift. So I have these 2 examples of what the difference in summer can be, is that all of a sudden, all this structured time that was there, that did provide some ability to initiate, that did provide some windows. They might have been small, but they were there, all of a sudden becomes big and white. So what do we do with this big and white? Now it feels like we have all this more time. So why aren't we using it to do our summer reading? Now that we have all this space on our schedule, why aren't we using it? Well, there can be shifts between our weeks. I know I have plenty of weeks this summer that look like that just one goal of sleep, and it's just grayed off and there's nothing else on my schedule. And then I have a lot of weeks on my schedule that might look like the other alternative. That looks like a typical school year week that has a lot of appointments, that I have camp, that I'm going to the pool, that I have this tennis lesson that I'm going to. So what do? How can we support this as parents? How can we help them learn this skill, whether they're in school and having homework or over the summer when there's this unstructured time? So there's 3 main ways that we can help as parents support and structure this downtime that they sometimes have. One is to make their preferences the star of the show. Now, this is not me saying that if their preference is to play on the Xbox for 6 hours, that that's what they do right when they wake up in the summer. That's not what I mean by making it the star of the show. What we mean by that is put it on the schedule first. Acknowledge that it's important for them. Write it down. Like, what are some goals that you have for the summer? What do you want to say? If they say sleep, okay, write it down. If they say hang out with friends, okay, great. Goal for the summer, hang out with friends. Acknowledge that their choices do matter and that they do have desires. Could you imagine if I told Debbie as her partner here that I just cannot wait to sleep in? And she's like, well, remember, we had that webinar to prepare for. And remember, you got to get this done. And remember, like, how invalidating would that feel? I wouldn't feel supported. I wouldn't feel like acknowledged that my needs or my desires matter. So yeah, just acknowledge that their preferences are there, write them down, but that doesn't mean it has to come first. It just means acknowledge it, make it the star. The second strategy that we can use here is give them ways to have some flexibility, some autonomy, some choice in their schedule. So it might be, what are we going to do first or second, giving them options. And then the third is to help them get started now. So if we set the goal that I'm going to read chapter 1 on Thursday, now when it comes to Thursday and it's time to read chapter 1, I don't feel like it. Like, I'm sure everybody in this webinar here has heard that phrase before. I just didn't feel like it. So how can we actually help them on-ramp? So these next 2, providing choice and then helping them on-ramp, are the next set of strategies that we're going to talk about. But first, we're going to acknowledge, like, hey, why do we need to use them? Because it's really hard to get started.
Lindsay, I just wanted to add one quick thing about the school year schedule, if you don't mind, is that, one of the things we talk a lot about is how can we transfer responsibility from, the parents to students. And, a lot of the questions that we get is, we might have a longer term assignment, but our students really don't have the executive function skills or the ability to know that if the test might be on Thursday or the long-term, the long-term project might be due on Thursday and it's Monday, that, if I have sports on Tuesday and Wednesday, I really need to do it on Monday because it won't feel as urgent to them. And we'll talk about this here in just a minute. And so one of the reasons we like to use this schedule is that if kids, if they're younger kids, they can use crayons and colors, color pencils and stuff and color all of that in. If they're older, they just need to write the stuff in there because it gives them it almost to say their responsibility now. I'm going to look at it, I'm going to see, oh, it's pretty obvious when I X that block off that I won't really have the time. It's different than just, oh yeah, I'm going to have the time. So it just it's a strategy that I think will help the kids to really see it versus just, oh yeah, I have the time.
And the key, Debbie, as you shift to the next one, is doing it together. Yeah. Doing it together is key. Don't just do this and then hand it off to them. That feeling part of this is a real important factor of it.
Yeah, for them doing it. Yes, exactly.
So for this, we were talking about that when it comes to that Thursday, is it actually time to read that chapter 3? We go through this checklist with our students who are taking our study skills courses, that there are barriers to getting started. There's not a moral failing for when I set an intention to do something and then I just can't get it done. So we try to help them reflect back and acknowledge that there can be multiple reasons on why I might be having trouble. You might see a few that look familiar to your student or yourselves even, but we start with them acknowledging this because the little monkey that you see on the screen, that they've had that feeling of intending to get something done, and then this little instant gratification monkey tries to distract and pull the wheel and say, nope, let's go play Xbox, or nope, let's check out what's going on Snapchat, or let's go outside and play. That sounds a lot more fun than reading chapter 1. So we acknowledge this of where their barriers are so that we can then help them with the right solution here. So what Debbie was describing earlier and why that calendar helps is usually the urgency of the last minute really helps us initiate. There's a lot of people, we've heard that before, that I can even say, I work better under pressure. Well, I was talking about that instant gratification monkey. The only thing that scares it away is this panic monster that comes at the last minute. So these phrases and the screenshots that you see here on your screen are from this great TED Talk that we recommend almost every single webinar. So apologies for those who are in the chat, but we cannot spread the word enough. It's called Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator. It's a TED Talk, and it talks and it really walks through this internal, really complicated mental processes, but in a really accessible way that feels real. We all know what it's like, that what can help us put our phone away and get started is when we get that email that says, hey, I'm missing that blah, blah, blah that you were, oh, shoot, that can really help me initiate, because that last minute panic helps spur into initiate. Now, we as parents, often when we're asking, hey, how's that summer reading going? Or have you started chapter 1 yet? We are unintentionally becoming our child's panic monster. They often, as I'm having these conversations with students who are taking the course, hearing the parents' footsteps come up the stairs, that can be the initiation. That can help spur them off their bed and then go shift over to the desk, because we're becoming that panic monster because we're just reminding about the urgency, or we're trying to reinforce that there's some kind of urgency when they're not feeling it yet. So what we wanted to go through is how can we replace that role, because we really don't want to be that role. So what you see here on the screen here is this reminder that they do know what they have to do. They know that's the back part of their brain that develops first. So this knowing part of their brain is developing, and it's the go part of their brain that tells them to actually get started that is still in the works and still developing, that they need strategies for. So this no-go model came from Dr. Karen Warblow, who we had as a guest speaker for ours. She has a great resources on this, but what is the key takeaway here is that these 4 things that you see on your screen help activate that go part of the brain. Whether it's developed or not, whether it's developing, and whether we're using strategies, we can lean into these 4 areas in how we can help support our students. The first being that interest. That's why it's important for them to pick the book. That's why it's important for them to maybe say, hey, do I really want to write down in a journal every week? Or maybe I could do a video diary. Maybe I could record myself talking about chapter 1. That kind of creates some interest for them that can help them initiate. The other thing is this novelty. I'll just point this, reading in new locations, in the hammock outside, or I know a lot of us, myself included, maybe get activated when I get to buy some new highlighters or a new journal or some new Post-it notes that are really cool. There's transparent Post-it notes. Guys, there's transparent Post-it notes out there that are really cool, and they're great for annotating a book. But that kind of interest could be I can't wait to try this out, this novelty there. Now, there's a healthy way to provide some urgency. What happens, especially in summer, is that urgency isn't there, or longer term projects, the urgency isn't there until the last minute. So what we can help with is a first then schedule, which just means first it's chapter 1, then we're going to the pool. It brings the actual reward closer in their mind. The reward that we're trying to get them to is, oh my gosh, you're going to enjoy your August more. You're not going to be stressed out that first week in September. You're not going to be panicking when the teacher asks about the book report. That's what we want them to have the reward for. But we need to bring it closer because that is way too far away. So we can bring that up and have a first then schedule and make it visual for the younger kids, make it very specific for the older. Kids in high school get to start articulating that themselves. First I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And then this last one I'll say is, I'm sure some of us know that kid who just won't do it until you tell them that they can, then that activates that challenge part of their brain. There's a healthy way to do that too. So a book club is okay, are there a couple students within the grade that picked the same book? Could we meet once a week and go to the Starbucks down the street and talk about it? There's a little bit of competition or challenge in that it keeps me able to initiate, because I know that I want to go and talk about it. I don't want to be the only one in this group that's not talking about it. And I'll just explain the last one here, because this baseline comprehension test, I'll explain it as a way to challenge, saying, hey, when there isn't structured goals, let's just start. Let's just see, is there actually, if Of Mice and Men is a book I'm reading, Let's see, can I answer a short answer question about Of Mice and Men? Nope. Could I answer some of these character questions? I might not know it yet. So that can activate there. Well, I actually want to find out who Lenny is. I really want to find out some of this information. They're not going to perform well on that baseline comprehension test, but that can activate a little bit of the challenge for some of the students that way. So keeping these in mind, we're going to go in through some other more specific strategies about how to actually then get them started on maybe a longer term or further out goal that they might have.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. So to kind of summarize where we are, we wanted to talk a little bit about, of course, what executive functions are and where, where we can see some of the common school challenges, and then really understanding that it is one of the challenges is that that's specifically hard for kids is to get started, and that even though they may know what they should do, as Lindsay was saying, it really sometimes is very hard for them to go, and it takes them quite a bit of time, and they can have some challenges with inhibition as well, and kind of go down that rabbit hole. And so we really want to try to give them some of these 4 things that she talked about. But when it really comes to schoolwork, and specifically, we also wanted to share some strategies about how we work specifically with kids, and that you can too as parents. And we've all probably heard of this idea of chunking things up. There is, there's kind of the more simple type of chunking, like if you have 10 math problems and you want to chunk 5 a night, or 5 pages, you want to chunk 1 page a night if you have a math packet. But then there is some other ways that we kind of consider a little bit more kind of on ramps, and we'll kind of explain that. And we use this term on ramp because it's kind of like when you're going on the highway, you want to get onto the highway without causing an accident. And what we really want kids is, for students, is to help them get into or onto the path of the assignment without fighting, without any challenges, right? And so it's really by sitting down next to them and kind of helping them with some of these strategies we'll continue to talk about. And chunking is just such a powerful strategy, because not only does it help you break things down, but it really helps you get started. And it also helps you better understand how long each chunk will take. And so a lot of times, as Lindsay implied, that when things are closer, it seems like more attainable. If I know that I have like a 15 or 20 or 30, 35-minute assignment, it's really not as overwhelming as that I have this big assignment that I don't quite understand. So when we talk about chunking, we have this specific acronym, and as Angie said, we'll be happy to send the slides, a link to the slides, and to everybody. And really, rather than kind of going through this entire acronym, which is what we teach, in our course, we want to show you an example of how chunking can really make a big difference. We had a we had a workshop the other day, and it was great because we were talking about what happens if it was how to get unstuck in writing. And one of the things we're talking about is chunking. We said, obviously this is for, middle school or high school student. What happens often is that students will get something like this from their teacher. And because the print's so small, and because it looks like there's so much to-dos on here, what do you think happens? That's a rhetorical question. Well, what happens to a lot of people is that, they get anxious and they avoid. We asked the workshop filled with high schoolers, what would your temperature be if you heard that you have this, multi-page paper due in 2 weeks, and they used a temperature chart, and most of them had pretty high temperatures, meaning emotional temperatures. And so when we get anxious about things, we avoid, and that's just period, the end. So when you have anxiety, you treat avoidance. And so what we do is, kids don't often like to print things out. And so what we always suggest is, rather than saying to our students, hey, have you started on this paper that you have? We encourage them to print that out or reprint it out and say, oh, so many times teachers really write stuff that's really superfluous. It's not that important. And when you look at this paper, and if you imagine it without the yellow highlighting, you can imagine how overwhelming it might be. You can see that the first paragraph and a half, really is not that meaningful. And so, there's a lot of benefits here to if we were doing this as an example with an on-ramp, it's like, let's just look and see, if we can highlight only the things that really matter. What are the things that are truly the requirements of the paper? And as you can see, so we highlighted some things, we underlined some things, and then we were able to actually create these little chunks here, these on the left-hand side. I'm pointing to the screen as though you can see me. Sorry about that, everyone. But you can see the little boxes and the things that are circled. And there's multiple benefits of this. And when I was explaining the benefits, I'll go ahead and explain it, and then I'll kind of give you the punchline. But when I was explaining the benefits is, number one, if you were to keep this digitally and you were just to look at it, obviously without the highlighting, or if you can highlight online, then that's probably, a great option as well. But if you were just to do that and you kept going back to it and you didn't have it, you weren't able to highlight it, you would probably need to keep reading it over and over again and revisiting it over again, which is kind of time consuming. And also by highlighting it and by making these little check boxes, you can then create your to-dos. What are the different to-dos that you need to chunk? And some of these are very small to-dos. And so actually to get started, the very first thing you could do the very first night is just your to-do is to read through it and create the chunks. So you feel like, wow, okay, what does that do? Number one, it makes it so I don't have to revisit it over and over again because I've already created the chunks, my own kind of to-do list. Number two, I can take those chunks, I can put them in a calendar, and I can, put them in over time. Number three, what I can do is I already know that it's not as bad as I thought because it looks much worse when it's not highlighted and I don't have these little chunks, right? So, and I'm already started. So as a parent, if this is, if you're able to, with an on-ramp strategy, we said, how can you be your executive function cheerleader, your students' executive function cheerleader? It's by helping them with these strategies and sitting down kind of emotionally and otherwise next to them. And I'll tell you that, when I went through that argument, one of the high schoolers in the first row, I don't remember if you heard this, Lindsay, said, wow, that's a really compelling argument. So I'm like, how many of you now would be willing to print this off? And like pretty much all of them raise their hand because they're like, wow, I see how that helps me get into the assignment and make things smaller chunks and have my to-dos that I can put into my calendar, et cetera. And Lauren, I'm glad to know that's helping you at age 40 with your job. And I'll just say one last thing. I was working with a college student who had a rubric, and I asked, do you normally print these off? No, how easy do what's your anxiety level when you look at this? And it's, pretty high. And I also think, so I guess the point is we can't assume that kids always read directions and we can't assume they read thoroughly. But when you have a highlighter in your hand and you have a piece of paper in front of you, and especially if someone else can be sitting there supporting you as a coaching way, it makes it a lot easier. So I spent quite a bit of time on that, but hopefully you see how this is bringing a lot of these things together, that when you have a barrier, even if the student isn't saying, they're not going to come up to you and say, this is a very overwhelming assignment to me. My anxiety is getting really high. My temperature's going up. You're not going to see that. You have to have some x-ray vision. You have to say, why are they avoiding it? What does it look like? What does the assignment look like? And so we spent a lot of time in this because, as I said, it kind of brings a lot of these strategies together.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and this why we love this strategy so much is because we know what it's like to pull something out. Like Lauren was saying, pulling that up and feeling that anxiety is very real. What we often fall backwards into the mistake of as adults supporting them is we just say, chunk it up, do a small step. And they're thinking in their head, and I'll say they're screaming in their head, how? So that's why we love that strategy so much. To get them to these benefits that you see here, we all know this, that by chunking it up, now you can do your best work. Then it isn't that last minute when they're like, I work better under pressure. But is it your best work? No, we all know that. No matter how much it might be a tough pill to swallow, we know it's not our best work. And one of the benefits also is that, yeah, I do have free time later. You're telling me I don't have to spend my last weekend of the end of the summer to lose my Saturday and my Sunday and my Monday of Labor Day writing this book report. I actually have more time. I swear I'm not trying to make your life worse by helping you chunk, but they can't see those benefits because they haven't experienced them yet. So that's why we want to help them with the how. That's what we mean by helping and supporting the process. Help them with the how to get them to these. Now, I'll point out here that we have this little screenshot of a Kanban board with just sticky notes. Earlier, when I was referring to providing choice and flexibility helps. That helps activate that go brain. a lot of the resistance that we have for students to planning, long-term planning, comes from, well, what if it comes to Thursday and I can't get started on that chapter 1? Now the whole rest of the plan feels like it was useless, and I've let down my parents. I let down my teachers every day. I let down myself with I set an intention, and then I can't activate and I can't get started. So why we love this strategy is because, okay, you don't have to pick your whole plan for the whole summer. Let's just put all those goals on a Post-it note and put them up on the wall. They're going to stay in that left-hand column that says to do, and we're going to pick 1 a day, or 1 a week, or 2 a day, or 2 a week. It doesn't matter. Put your chunks on that Post-it note, and then divide it up by how many weeks you have to work, and then just move them over into the doing column as you're doing them. And then this is a personal preference, I'm one that likes to see it in the done column. Other people like to crush it up and throw it away, and then it never exists. It's kind of like the people who like to check off versus cross off their to-do list. I'm a check off. I like to see it, but there's no harm in taking that Post-it note and throwing in the trash when they've read chapter 1. That is what we mean by providing some flexibility in planning, instead of just saying, hey, yeah, you got to slap it on a color-coded calendar that's up on the board, and then it feels almost per intention that they might not be able to fulfill. So we want to give them some of that choice and flexibility in their planning. Now, planning is a big part of what we do. So what we'll make a little plug here is why they need some strategies through all the planning process here is they can't see the need necessarily to plan because, hey, my teacher might have already chunked things up for me. Or my teacher might be posting the assignments online. This is a screenshot from Google Classroom of a student's list of work. But this is actually not a plan. This is just a list of due dates. And so a really important feature that we teach all of our students, everyone who walks through their door and everyone here, is that there's a difference between a list of due dates and a plan. A plan is what you are going to do. So what you're going to do, you can use a tool. This is what we use here at our center, and I'll make a little plug. I can show you real quick, just some of our students working here at the desk. All of them made one of these plans when they came in this evening to actually set the intentions of what they were going to do. Didn't matter when the due dates were. That's part of the planning process, but they're first going to start with listing these to-dos. And how they list them is listing it specifically as possible. So it helps you activate and get started when you're specific. So instead of just saying math homework, my brain can play tricks on me and say it's going to take forever. But if I say math homework problems 1 through 13 odd, all of a sudden they stop and they go, oh, that's not so bad. But when you ask your kids what they have for homework, they're just going to say math homework, or I have my history paper. The more specific you go, the more chunked really it is. So this helps them get started. I once had a student tell me, oh, you just want me to write down the specifics because you're a teacher and teachers like you to write. And similar to the compelling argument that Debbie had, the student realized I actually saved time because I didn't have to keep going back to Google Classroom to check. I didn't have to click open that actual announcement multiple times throughout the night to check how many problems I had. It was right there on my plan. So the 20 seconds it took to write down that specific saved them minutes of lost time of taxing their working memory, of flipping back and forth and back and forth. Now, also when we're planning, we use a strategy of previewing it. I got so excited today when a student said, ooh, I haven't even looked at that yet, and then clicked it and opened it. I got so excited because what she realized was I needed to look at this in order to make it specific, and I needed to look at this to get a time estimate. She was trying to determine whether she had time for it today. The due date was in 2 weeks. Do I have time for it today? I need to look at it to decide that. That's a great skill that they need to learn how to do. So we have this as part of the planning process, previewing it, looking at it, reduces that barrier, reduces that anxiety. And then the last one is going in order. How can we help them prioritize? How we help our students prioritize is what is a priority to do based on due date, and then also help them prioritize based on easy and hard, because easy and hard is subjective. Priorities based on time deadlines are not. How much something is worth, that can also be how we prioritize. But easy and hardest objectives. So we help them work through by starting with something easy that's still high priority, that still might have a due date, it might be a chunk of something that they need to get done. It might be making that checklist. That might be something easy to get started with, but it's a great thing to get started with. And then the second thing is always that hardest, the thing that they're most likely to avoid, the thing that might take the longest, because their brain is now on ramped. They've kind of warmed up. They've felt successful, and that can help sustain them and keep that ball in motion into that hardest assignment. And by switching back and forth, they kind of they prevent the loss and fatigue in leaving everything that's hardest to the end of the night when they're burnt, or leaving all the easiest stuff for the end of the night where they're just like, I can do that tomorrow. By shifting back and forth, they kind of prevent those pitfalls that we can fall into ourselves too. So we'll kind of show you what the completed final product looks like from a student of ours.
Yeah, so why do we talk about this? We're talking about this again in the context of how can we be our students' executive function cheerleaders? Well, it's by helping them with on-ramps. Planning is an initiation strategy. We all know that if we have a huge project to do, we can kind of get going with it. But at the end of the day, we really need a plan. We can't just make a list of things to do. At some point, we really need to start thinking about when we're going to do it, how long it's going to take, what's dependent on each other, things like that. And I think kids, they tend to resist planning because they think, oh, it's just going to take so much longer. But what can we be doing? We gave you the link to this plan. We'll share it also when we send out the slides. You can print that out. You can make your own, by practicing every single day, going through this assignments in the same order every time. Then we start to build that muscle. I'm not going to just rely on my own memory or what I'm kind of feeling like doing at first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to know that I've looked at every single thing in the portal every single night. I know that I'm going to see about how long it's going to take. I'm going to be as specific as possible so that I can, not, again, as Lindsay said, have to waste more time later when I'm already tired because I already forgot what those math problems were that I need to do. But it also then gives them direction to move. So basically, you're thinking at the beginning, the first 3 or 4 columns of this is filled out up to the prioritization where you see it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we're also, by starting them with something easy, it's like kind of getting on the treadmill. You don't want to go full out. You want to start by walking a little bit, warming up your body. It's the same thing with your brain. And it also lowers that barrier for them. Again, we're trying to lower the barriers. Every time there's a barrier, there's a strategy. So if my first thing I have to do is just email my teacher or just take something out and highlight it, then that's an easy way for me to get going. And what we find is that with most of our kids, once they get going, then they can keep going. And the other thing we always talk about is to really work in breaks, because believe it or not, breaks are really critical for kids. They sometimes don't trust themselves to get started again, but we'll talk a little bit later about how we think breaks is such a great strategy. So hopefully you see the benefit of planning and a benefit of building those executive function muscles by using this system that you use over and over again. And the other thing that we talk a lot about is now that we have our plan, what are other solutions to start? What are these other on-ramps that we're talking about? Well, one of the examples, we don't have time to go through all of them, but one of the examples are really, again, we might have questions we have to read, we have to answer about a particular book. A lot of times the barrier there is that the kids don't really specifically understand the questions. And so we have this idea, I call it myself connecting with the question or rewording the questions for clarity. Sometimes it's just about picking up that paper and looking at it and saying, okay, let's make the font bigger for these questions. Let's reword these questions to make sure we really understand them, because sometimes the questions themselves are a little bit overwhelming. So I think that it's really, again, hopefully you start to see, it's really about digging more into the content and helping them with a way to start that lowers the barrier to get started. Same kind of thing with math and science. Sometimes it's just about, if it seems too much, just making it, almost gamifying it, getting a little whiteboard out. We've done this with many students and just saying, okay, let's just do some random, we're going to write on the whiteboard the odd numbers and then you can erase them every time you get them done. But it's really, about helping them kind of get into it with the easiest way they possibly can with getting started. And so we'll talk about a couple other solutions or strategies to initiate. Do you want to do that, Lindsay?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, this is one that we oftentimes just say like, hey, this is something to like screenshot or just print out and have like close to their homework area of just saying when I'm really stuck and we walk in and we see them not reading that chapter 1 or anything, we can make a suggestion with an initiation strategy rather than reminding them or trying to scare them with that last minute panic monster. Like, you only have 3 more weeks. It might be like, okay, well, why don't we actually just open up a Google Doc and let's title it Summer Reading Book Report. Let's just open up one and title it that. Then now you're helping support the process by reminding them of the solution, not reminding them of the problem. The problem is, yeah, we only have 3 weeks left. This is where we can help with that process, is reminding of the solution. So this is just one. There's thousands of little tiny initiation strategies, and you can make them personal to yourself, thinking of like what has worked and helping reflect on that. But you see just some suggestions here. But the takeaway, like Debbie was saying, all of this is just really to help you have these tools of how can we be their cheerleader, and why we use the word cheerleader. This actually came out one day when Debbie and I were talking, and I was like, what do we need? What do we need for our staff and our parents and what these kids really just need to be cheerleaded as these skills are developing, because they're going to have bumps along the road. They're going to have mistakes. That's the whole point. That's how we learn. But in the rush and the urgency that we have of growing up, we can sometimes forget that. So by hopefully today starting with that understanding, that knowing that the executive functions and these study skills are something that need to be developed, and they can be supported and scaffolded through these strategies as they're developing. Now we want to just kind of wrap up here with some language that we can use to help actually continue with this cheerleading. Now that we have this understanding, we have some strategies here. How can we use some of the language to enact it? So as you've heard tonight, we've used a lot of these phrases. Are you all caught up? Do you have homework tonight? What immediately happens when we use these phrases? We become that student's panic monster, and we activate their fight or flight mode in their brain, and they become defensive, and the wall gets up, and then all of a sudden there might be a fight. You don't trust me. I told you I was doing it. Or the best night might be like, no, I don't have any homework. So what we want to give you here is some tools. So what we really want to use is this strategy called collaborative problem solving, which I'm sure many of you have heard. That's okay. No, so as she goes back here to this visual, is that when we say, hey, do you have homework or have you started your summer reading? It feels like an unhealthy conflict of me versus you. So me versus you is that unhealthy conflict of, hey, did you get started? What we want to do is say, let's identify the problem together and let's be detectives. I'm not going to tell you you're having trouble getting started. I'm going to collaboratively problem solve with you to figure out, hey, is it an initiation strategy we need? So on the next slide, we're going to take a look on an example. I want you to think that this is just one example of how to collaboratively problem solve with your school-age student who might have some missing work with homework. However, I want you to keep in mind that this can be used with any scenario. And I'm sure we've also heard this also works with partners, spouses, this kind of language of collaborative problem solving together. So I'm going to take you through the scenario that, hey, this student has missing work. That's incredibly frustrating for the parents, and we'll acknowledge it's incredibly frustrating for the student themselves, even though they might not be showing that outwardly. They might not show the care about it, but here's the problem we want to solve, right? We want to solve missing work. Now, there's some external factors that might be happening. Like there might be a lag in the grade book that they thought they had it done. They thought they hit submit, and all of a sudden now it's missing. And then there's also these internal factors of, yeah, they need self-monitoring skills. They're not actually using skills to double check if they turn something in, to confirm whether they turn something in. So I'm going to walk you through. There's this plan A that doesn't work. Like we as parents might email their teacher and say, can you confirm what my student has and doesn't have, what's missing, what's still to do? That doesn't help them build the skill. And then on the other end, my option C there, I could punish, right? I could take away their phone and say, you are not getting this phone back until you get all this missing work made up. Well, guess what? They still don't have that skill of self-monitoring. So by collaborating, we're not just being like warm, soft parents, we're actually helping them build the skill. So we want to always start with this empathy, is acknowledging that it does probably feel really overwhelming. It probably does feel pretty frustrating to not know what's graded yet, what still needs to be graded, what I've turned in, what I've not. Then problem definition is just saying, okay, from what you're saying, it sounds like we need to have a way for you to track your assignments outside of what your teachers are putting in the grade book. You have to have that ownership over, it sounds like you need to have ownership over your own assignments outside of that grade book. And then the invitation is giving an option. There's really a choice, non-choice here in this invitation example, but it's getting their autonomy in it. It's getting their choice in it. What I was stressing earlier is so important here. So what do you think is the best way for you to plan? Do you think it's a paper planner or do you think it's digitally? If I had gone straight from there and said, you have missing work, that's it, we're going to go buy you a planner. You keep telling me you don't need a planner, but we're going to get one today because you have all this missing work. Fail, right? It just would have been one of those like very well-intentioned, but one of those moments where we're like, oh, maybe, oh, parenting failures, those times where it leads to a fight. But this kind of walking through, starting with the empathy, then identifying the problem together, defining it, and then inviting them with the solution, you not dictating or demanding a solution, but inviting them into that problem-solving solution there. So hopefully that helps, whether they're 5 or 25, this kind of path will work.
Yeah, and it's important really to remember, as we always do, as frustrated as we can be sometimes with our kids, is that, they're not being a problem, they're having a problem. And so because they're having a problem, we want to, as parents, like we always do, if they fell down or anything else where they're having a problem, we want to cheer them on. And we have shown a little video in the past where you see that kids are learning how to walk, and every time they fall down, we as parents have always clapped, and like they got up again. But somehow when they get to math class and they don't get an A on their paper, or they don't get the first problems right away, we often don't clap. We have to remember that mistakes is just another word for learning, which is really the growth mindset language. And so we talk a lot also at the Study Pro about this idea of watering the seeds. And what does that really mean, watering the seeds? As we've been saying through the chat and throughout the night, these executive functions are developmental. And so they're not going to start like piano or soccer or anything. And I think, instruments are a really great example. Our younger kids are not going to be great. Most of our younger kids are not going to be great at that piano, but we want to water the seeds. We want to water, like, oh, it's great to see you practicing. It's, oh, great, to hear you trying something that's new, or, a new song. We want to water the seeds of things we want to see growing. And it's the same thing with executive functions. So, we often want to, just, even though maybe that strategy didn't work as well as we wanted, like, oh, I'm going to try this strategy of highlighting. Maybe it's not perfect. Just the fact that they're sitting down and willing to highlight with you, or maybe the plan wasn't exactly and as thorough as we want, but just the fact they're planning. I mean, we had somebody in the Homework Center yesterday who tends to rush through her work a lot. And, she was willing to let me go through it. And, when she gave one example, to give another. And was it what we all would want as parents to be perfect? No. But what I said to her was, wow, revision is hard. And the fact that, but it's part of writing. And I think it's just incredible that you were so open to revising. It just really makes you a better writer. Not all students are open to that. And, I know that as a parent, if that was my student, I would get frustrated because I would think, okay, that's not as great of a revision as I was hoping. But it just opened the door, because you should have seen her face. It was like, wow, because we're watering the seeds of the teeniest little thing that wasn't exactly perfect for what we wanted, but it's what we want to grow. So I think it's something that we always like to leave people with, because we know that it's hard as a parent and that we have our own fears. And that sometimes we're like, well, if they don't get this right, then blah, 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 this isn't going to happen. But we have to remember we don't have any other choice, because unless we're watering the seeds of the things we want to grow, then we're just berating the things that aren't working and making our kids kind of feel bad about themselves. So, we're never going to be perfect parents, but we do want to try to remember, it's 80% of the time, to try to water those seeds as much as possible. And so, I think the key takeaways, hopefully, is that understanding that these are just missing and developing skills. These are, these are skills that we want to help develop, just like we want them to play the piano and play sports and do other stuff. You know, we're going to cheer them on, even if they lose the game, right? We're still going to cheer them on for trying hard, and the same kind of thing. And the other thing I'll say, even though it's not part of the summary, is it doesn't mean we're accepting them not just doing their homework. We're just cheering them on. No, it doesn't mean that we don't have our own, you know, hopes and dreams for them. But what it, you know, what it means is that we want to help them feel confident that they're moving in the right direction, and to really pay attention to and stress the things that we want to help them build the skills to be able to get to the places we want. And so, you know, on and on, I think we could go about all this, but we hope that this really helps. And we would just share that, you know, we do a lot of summer things at the Study Pro, and we do writing because it's such an important part of executive function. It's such an important process. There is a whole process of writing and a lot of executive function skills that are required. So we do one-on-one coaching, and we do executive function and study skills courses and classes and things like that. And we hope to meet you. But more importantly, we really hope that you learn some strategies from what we share today. And if, you know, we know that it's 8 o'clock, and so you're more than welcome to go. But if you do have some questions, we're happy to field any. So, and if there was anything you learned from tonight, and you want to share it on the chat, we would love to know that. But we thank you for sticking around. There's still as many people almost as started, so that was a good sign.
Oh,
Thank you. Oh my gosh, Paula, you're still awake. That's incredible. I'm so happy to see that. Thank you, Jen. That's so nice. Thanks for everybody. We really appreciate it. And thanks again to Nysmith. And you guys, if you're not on our mailing list, you can send your email via info. If you registered, you will be, because then you get all the other webinars that we do. But there was a question here. Oh, this is about materials organization. And there was just, yes, materials organization is all part of executive function. And so, Lindsay, do you want to talk more about that? It's a problem with keeping your room clean and things like this. We'll try to make it generic so that everybody can benefit from that as well.
Yes, we do. So yeah, materials organization could be like your physical papers for work, your digital materials, but like you were describing, it's also keeping the room clean. So how we teach, especially in our courses, is about how you can set up a system, but then also how you can maintain a system. So I will say, even no matter what, I'll tell you one of the strategies that, again, I use in my personal life is this introduction of like a reset day, that sometimes there's a lot of pressure over keeping your room, and then it becomes this big blob that it feels like a very big amorphous goal in mind to do. But when we break it down, say the chunking for that research paper is the same kind of chunking that we can do for the room. And think about those 4 things about like novelty, interest. This is what I was just doing with a student yesterday who literally had a goal as a college student, but she was having a goal to clean up her room because she couldn't get her homework done. She couldn't do her summer readings for college until she kind of had a clear desk. So we literally thought, okay, well, how can we get some like interest to this? She made a playlist. I had her estimate how long she thought it would take to clean up all the cups and moldy paper plates and all those. And she said, I think it'll take about 45 minutes. I go, okay, that's about 12 songs. Let's make a playlist of 12 songs. And then she's like, oh yeah, okay, let me add this. And then some like urgency was she's going to text me when she was done. So it wasn't a threat. She just like had this urgency of like, yeah, I want to text and I'm going to send you a before picture and an after picture. So there's ways to help support that materials organization, but the key kind of takeaway is to, again, collaboratively problem solve with that student the way we're talking about. I didn't say, okay, well, you have to do it and you have to do it by 5 p.m. So you better send me a text. It was like, no, okay, let's talk about how we can make it more interesting for you. It's kind of boring and it feels like it's going to take forever. So yes, so that's a long-winded yes, we do support it, but I also just wanted to leave you with some tips on how you can maybe suggest some ways.
All right, I think that's all the questions that we had. Again, you can email us at info@thestudypro.com. That goes to Lindsay and I. So if you have any questions, or if you want to talk about your students specifically, or if you just have questions in general, we are always giving out resources. Everybody who's been on our webinars before know we will we will share any kind of resources. We have lots of friends in the industry that do lots of different kinds of things, and we love to share that. So anyway, we very much appreciate everybody being here, and we hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we will be with you on that countdown. I actually have 9 more days, Lindsay, not 8, not 10, so that's great.
9? Sorry, I was just replying.
9 more days. So congratulations to everyone for making it through to the almost end of the school year, and we really appreciate you being here. And thanks again to Nysmith.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay, and we'll send out the replay in just a moment. Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye. Good night.